Good day, my name is Park Ranger Michael Callahan, and welcome to History from St. Paul's. Today, in our ongoing series of videos, we will be discussing the life of James Sinclair Polite, a veteran of the Civil War era, and a resident of the city of Mount Vernon, New York. James Polite is buried in our historic cemetery. James Sinclair Polite was born to slavery in the Charleston area of South Carolina sometime around 1845. According to the records of the Freedmen's Bureau, James was the son of George and Polly Polite, and was one of 8 children. This time period defined the height of the antebellum era in the American South, where slavery was firmly entrenched in both the social and economic systems. But by the 1850s, there was a demand for change in the abolition of slavery in the northern states. The election of Abraham Lincoln to the presidency in 1860 initiated the secession of southern states in the Union, the first of which was South Carolina in December of that year. James Polite and many of the enslaved persons must have realized that change was coming, and coming soon. The signed Emancipation Proclamation in early 1863 confirmed this belief. Meanwhile, the Northern War Department had authorized the raising of regiments comprised of black enlisted men and white officers. Some of these regiments, such as the famed 54th Massachusetts and Fort Wagner fame, were raised by the states, but others were raised by the federal government itself. These units were titled the United States Colored Troops. One of these regiments, the 35th Infantry, was raised in the fall of 1863 as the 1st North Carolina Volunteers, and is retitled as the 35th U.S. Colored Troops in 1864. The regiment's enlisted men mostly comprised freedmen from the coastal areas of the Carolinas and Georgia. Colonel James C. Beecher, a half-brother of Harriet Ward Beecher, the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, commanded the regiment. The 35th served in the Department of the South and fought a number of engagements in Florida, including the Battle of Lusty in February of 1864. James Sinclair Polite enlisted in the 35th in the spring of 1865, at a time most of the Confederate armies had surrendered. On the enlistment register, an officer of the 35th wrote in Polite's name, which Polite then marked with an X. This would indicate limited literacy on the part of Polite, but is not surprising, considering where and how he had spent his early years. His occupation is listed as a farmer, possibly denoting having been enslaved prior to and during the war before escaping to freedom and enlisting. Though most of the fighting had ended with Lee's surrender at Appomattox, there was still an important role for the U.S. Army in the South as an army of occupation. One of the missions of the Army was to support the efforts of the Freedmen's Bureau. The Bureau was founded in March of 1865 as an agency of the federal government, and existed until 1872. The role of the Bureau was to provide food, clothing, and shelter to former enslaved persons, as well as to reunite any family separated from the antebellum period and during the Civil War. The Bureau is also responsible for teaching the former slaves to read and write. This was critical, since once well educated, or even given just the basic skills, the former slaves would have some form of upward mobility. The Bureau will also represent African Americans in state and federal courts, and also encourage plantation owners to rebuild their properties and utilize the former enslaved persons as paid labor. Finally, the Bureau will closely monitor contracts between the newly freed laborers and white business owners to ensure that African American laborers were paid and treated fairly. This was an important mission, as it entailed bringing African Americans to the mainstream of American society. It was also a dangerous mission. Groups such as the newly formed Ku Klux Klan targeted the Freedmen's Bureau to disrupt its activities. This included acts of violence against the former slaves and Bureau employees, which included Army officers detailed to the Bureau from their regiments. All needed protection from the Klan. This was provided by Army units garrisoning the cities and towns of the former Confederate states. The 35th was one of these units, and from mid-1865 through June of 1866, the regiment was stationed in the Charleston area, ironically, the location of James Polite's birth and where he spent his early years. It must have been a strange but good feeling for the former slave, now a freed man, wearing the uniform of the United States Army, to be playing a role in the advancement of the local African American community as well as their protection. Polite was discharged in May of 1866, and followed the common migration pattern of moving north along the railway lines to better life in the north. Although he only spent a little over a year in the Army, his service in the 35th had changed his life. Service in the Army had provided Polite and his fellow soldiers a resource to learn basic literacy skills, a sense of purpose, and a sense of pride, not to be found in the prior lives of slaves. It is no coincidence that many of the African American leaders in the Reconstruction South included many veterans of the U.S. colored troops. By 1872, James was employed as a waiter in Tenafly, New Jersey. He was living with his wife Anna on Grand Street in Lower Manhattan. He had learned to write, possibly in the Army, since he signed an application for an account at the Freedmen's Bank in 1872. By the 1890s, James and Anna, along with their son, also named James, were relocated to Mount Vernon, New York, a small city with a growing African-American population. The family resided on Mount Vernon Avenue, and James found employment as a clerk, again denoting that he was fairly well educated at this point. James Polite passed away on 19 November 1903. He was buried in the city section of St. Paul's Cemetery. A free man, proud of his military service, who through hard work was supporting and improving the life of his family. A long way from a plantation in South Carolina. His legacy was his sons becoming a leader in the emerging civil rights movement in the Mount Vernon area, organizing to protest against discrimination in housing and public health. Please join us again soon for more History from St. Paul's.